Hey guys, it's Jordan here from SwitchWatch. How are you doing today? Today's review is of Final Fantasy VII, finally on the Nintendo Switch. Let's see how this one holds up. When it comes to talking about video games, the one big question that gamers put to each other is the age-old, what is your favourite game of all time? It's a massive question, especially considering we put so much time into playing dozens and dozens of new games every year. But I suspect many of you have a go-to answer just as I do. And for me, that game is Final Fantasy VII. It's finally arrived on a Nintendo console after all these years, and I couldn't be more delighted to present you my review of the Nintendo Switch release of Final Fantasy VII. Before we get into it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for all our latest, greatest Nintendo Switch content. We plan on reviewing all of the Final Fantasy games on the Switch, so stick around for that. The story for Final Fantasy VII begins as the main protagonist, Cloud, is hired by a group of terrorists who want to save the planet against Shinra. Shinra are an all-powerful corporation sucking the world dry of its energy and can pretty much do as they please with little protest from any semblance of government. What follows is a world-spanning adventure as Cloud and his ever-increasing gang set out to follow the rogue Sephiroth, who's on a murderous mission to destroy the world. It's a rollercoaster ride of locations, situations, and everything pretty much going to pot at every opportunity. Unlike many of the Final Fantasy games, this is one of true dystopia where misery is in the very bones of pretty much every inhabitant. From the slums of Midgard to the refugee-like camp of North Coral, it's a world with a lingering depression shadowing over it, which for me makes it all the more fascinating as you see the residents just getting on with it. In Final Fantasy VII, you'll be getting a twist-filled adventure full of likeable and deplorable people in equal measure, some spectacular set pieces and events that are genuinely inventive and ambitious, especially for the time. You'll visit some truly memorable and iconic locations, whether it be the Gold Saucer, Juno, or infiltrating Shinra's headquarters. It's one heck of an adventure. There is deepness to the story too. There's sadness, loss, betrayal. You'll think about who you are, what your meaning is, and you'll put into question everything you've ever believed in. It has its heavy moments, but it's lighthearted too thanks to the endlessly weird tone that it's been drenched in. I think it's a phenomenal story in all honesty, one of the best in the whole series thanks to its pace, twists, and turns. Sure, the translation may not be the best, but it's not as noticeable as many people would try to lead you to believe. I'm not going to delve too deeply into the gameplay mechanics because this is Final Fantasy, and although it wasn't the first JRPG series, it pretty much set the benchmark for people's expectations of the genre. You walk around towns, advance the story, get into some random battles, and perhaps get involved in some side quests or minigames. That's standard. But what sets Final Fantasy VII apart from its peers, aside from its story, is the Materia System. It's a very atypical system in which any character can pretty much equip any ability, magic or summon, if you attach the respective orbs to their equipment. It does have its pros and cons, however, but the best thing about this is the experimentation. Any magic can be put side by side with modifiers that can create some awesome stuff. Sure, if you have enough good stuff, you can pretty much break the game if you know what to do and are clever enough about it. Thankfully, that's not likely on a casual playthrough, and it's well balanced for a first time play, at least if you're going in blind. I love how leveling up your magic is just as important as your characters. You can buy all the fire magic you want, but unless you equip it and level it up, you won't be seeing its more powerful forms at all. The negatives about the system are that, despite the freedom to experiment, it can be slightly limiting at times due to the very few slots available to attach stuff, especially at the beginning. You'll find yourself overwhelmed with materia but struggling to find space to accommodate them. It can also be overwhelming due to the lack of guidance in what suits what and what the decent combinations are. It doesn't hold your hand in this aspect, which, just thinking about that, is actually something I personally appreciate. If you've been watching my reviews a while, you know that I'm not a big fan of hand-holding. So this Switch port is coming with a handful of little aids to help you in your adventure, iron out some of the crinkles that often plague JRPGs and stop some people from enjoying the genre. This release has less modifiers than what Final Fantasy IX had, but you still have the basics. No random encounters, which should help alleviate some pains with backtracking or doing some smaller side missions. There's the ability to speed up the gameplay with the tap of the button. Of all the aids, I found this one to be the most useful. Speeding through some weaker random battles allowed the small bit of grinding needed a breeze. Finally, we have the battle enhancements, which, if pressed, will refill your health as well as boost everyone's limit breaks, their super attacks, to 4. Useful if in a bit of a pickle, but not something I would recommend using, as it will make the game pretty meaningless unless you just want to enjoy the story. I'm not sure why the money boosts and character level ups didn't make it into this as it did with the Final Fantasy IX port, but I guess it's not a major deal as I didn't use those myself anyways. For me, Final Fantasy VII is one of Nobuo Uematsu's best pieces, and considering the amount of true masterpieces that man has pumped out, that's not a statement to be taken lightly. It may lack the audio fidelity of some of the later PlayStation Final Fantasy games, probably as the company looked to get to grips with the CD technology and space requirements, but despite that, it's still phenomenal. There are some truly classic tracks here that rank among the greatest video game tunes of all time. I know I'm getting personal, but if there's ever a song to take me back to a more innocent time, back to a time when the world was a far easier place, it's Aerith's theme. Or is it the main theme? Maybe it's Tifa's theme. The fact is, Final Fantasy VII's soundtrack has filled my head with memorable theme after memorable theme, so many that if I close my eyes and listen to them, it can almost bring me to tears. How many game soundtracks can do that? Even as someone who's blinded by nostalgia such as myself, I know that even newcomers will be impressed by what the soundtrack has to offer here. From Nobuo's trademark playful style to his slow moving pieces and his epic battle tracks, you will be impressed even if they may not have the technology behind them to still feel modern. I mean, in my head, Those Who Fight Further sounds like this. Rather than what it actually sounds like, which is this. Still a classic, but you can't help but wish the soundtrack was remastered using modern technology. Maybe in the remake, right? Now, many people in my Final Fantasy IX review scorned at me for not mentioning the music bug in that game. I hold my hands up and say that I noticed nothing at all, but I made sure to check here in Final Fantasy VII, and it's unfortunate to say that it's still present here too. This is where basically if you initiate a random battle, the overworld theme will restart from the beginning rather than continuing from where it left off before the battle. Before you get angry, hear me out. It's not a big deal. Let's face it, it's one of those things that one person noticed and it caught on like wildfire. If someone didn't tell you, 99% of you wouldn't notice either like me. It's not a major problem in the slightest. But this has been a known issue for years and Square Enix and the porting team have done nothing about it, which is frankly ridiculous and unacceptable. The fact that it's here doesn't bother me in the slightest, but the fact that it hasn't been fixed after all this time does. Visually, Final Fantasy VII has probably aged the least well since the original NES games. It's that awkward early 3D era that no matter the console of the time, struggles to look good today. Characters are awkwardly blocky Lego figurines and are far less detailed than what came a year after with Final Fantasy VIII. It has its charm, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend it's still the greatest thing since sliced bread. I like it, but I wouldn't disagree with you if you prefer to laugh at it. The art style still holds up phenomenally well though, of that there is no doubt. From the wonderfully dystopian Midgar to the casino wonderland of the Gold Saucer, the blistering red of Cosmo Canyon and the eastern influences of Wutai. The world building is fantastic and for me, it has the most memorable locations of any Final Fantasy game. Don't at me. In this Switch port, the character models have been kept to their original, higher resolution rather than what they look like after being compressed for the PlayStation. It's pretty obvious to say, but this is far less necessary than when they did it for Final Fantasy IX, where it really showed and brought out the great details that was originally missed. Here, however, well, they're mostly their same blocky self with just more vibrant colours. I'm not entirely sure it was that necessary for 7, just for how much they lack in detail, of which this only highlights it even further. It's also worth noting that the game is in its original 4:3 rather than being updated to widescreen, which is always a shame. There is no border unlike Final Fantasy IX, which seems weird and a step down, although that's more of a personal preference. I'm sure some of you prefer it without the gradient border. I think the backgrounds hold up somewhat better on a big TV than Final Fantasy IX port did. Their simpler, more solid nature means less detail is lost when spread out far bigger than ever intended. Still, I do think Final Fantasy VII is far more suited for handheld play, in which it looks fantastic. In terms of value, I'm confused. Final Fantasy IX popped up out of nowhere and people screamed blue murder at the $20 price tag. I thought it was decent value for a classic game. Well, it looks like 7 is going to try and please those who bemoan that price tag, as this one is coming in at a cheaper $15.99. Why? Well, I guess there are less changes to this one. Not that 9 was full to the brim with them though. It just makes it even more of a bargain in my opinion. The UK price of £12.79 looks almost wrong at how cheap it is. 40 plus hours for little over a tenner? Yes please. Before we get into my final thoughts of Final Fantasy VII, don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're new here to keep up to date with all our great Switch content. And do us a favor, leave a like and also a comment. Tell us what you think of Final Fantasy VII. Are you nostalgic for it or do you hate it? Let us know. Overall, I think Final Fantasy VII is a must-own title if you've never played it before. It's regarded as a legend for very good reasons. You're getting a classic 40-hour epic with a great story, characters, set pieces, weirdness, and fantastic music. You can't go wrong. It's a bucket list game that you need to play. If you've owned it before, then there may be no reason to purchase it again, but I loved playing it on my Switch. For me, it's still a wonderful game, and to this day, it's still my favourite game of all time. I'm not going to let that cloud my judgment though, as I do recognise the visual flaws and slightly half-hearted port. I still give it a 9 out of 10. If you're not convinced, then head over right now to watch my video from a few weeks ago, giving you 7 reasons Final Fantasy VII is still awesome in 2019. I'll see you guys over there. Take care.